Today's guest has worked on some of the richest people's homes in America. He specializes in high-end carpentry. He's won a lot of craftsmanship awards. He employs over 100 people. Over 70 of them are carpenters. And he's humble, he's smart, he's a really talented guy, and he's going to share a lot of his lessons over the last 17 years of building a team, building a company. So we're honored to have you, Dan Parish. Welcome back to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Been a lot going on in the last week, so
thanks for making time for us.
Trying to settle in here. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed our first conversation, which I think was about a year ago or so.
Yeah, I think we were looking back, when we were connecting before this call, and I was like, man, I can't believe that's been a year. It was back in June, I think, of 23. So appreciate you being back on.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah. So there's an alarming stat that we've been talking about for a year. So now in the next 7 years, about 41% of the construction workforce is retiring. And there's a lot of people that don't have skills yet. And as the older generation retires, a lot of those skills just die off or retire off with people that have put in years and years into their trade. So Dan, you obviously have a university program now that you were telling us about, which is really, really cool. Obviously, you have over 70 carpenters, so you need something like that. At least it would seem to our audience, like, yeah, of course you have a university.
Yeah.
But walk us through a little bit what you're doing now, because it's really, really cool.
Yeah, so I think the last time we talked, the university was something that we were just kind of getting up and going, and it wasn't fully implemented yet. So fast forward to today, it is a fully implemented program. If you were to walk to the back of our facility here, there is a fake job site back there. It's probably about 35 feet by 45 feet in dimension. It has 4 or 5 rooms in it, multiple different like interior door rough openings, exterior window openings. It looks and feels like a job site, but it is not actually a live job site. It is both a lab. We're thinking about it like a research and development lab, which I guess you'd have at universities, as well as a training center. And what it's looked like is it's been staffed with 2 to 3 carpenters per week that come in from the field and do their tour of duty, you could say. The way we've set this up is that every field carpenter is required to do at least 80 hours per year at MBDU. And in that 80 hours, they will either be engaging in research and development, like testing better ways of doing things, trying out different carpentry techniques in order to sort of scientifically get down to what is the best technique. And so they're either engaging in that kind of an activity, or they're engaging in training or being trained.
So do you pair them with somebody else that has skill already, Dan, when you're
Yes.
when you're having to train somebody that's newer?
Yes,
We
exactly.
talked about this last time, but remind our audience on the team kind of makeup. You have the scaling system that you were talking about, of which I think is super cool.
Yeah, we have a ranking system which ranks out our carpenters on a scale of 1 to 10, with carpenter 1 being like an apprentice carpenter, someone who is brand new, has no experience. Level 10 being like a master. And what it does is it helps us to be a lot more objective about promotions. We have skills that are associated with each one of those ranks. And it also helps us keep our pay scale fair. So each rank has a low and a high wage that's associated with it. And when we can see that a carpenter has graduated from one level to another, there's a pay raise that's associated with that.
Super cool. So some of our audience are in the spot where they have 1 person, 2 people, et cetera, where they think, oh, well, this is cool for Dan. He's got 70 carpenters. Of course, you have a university. But I think it's interesting, your thoughts on this, as we were talking about this last week. And you had mentioned you wish you had done this sooner. So take me back in time. Let's go back 5-10 years. What would you have done sooner and why? I mean, why would you actually put the expense in before you had this massive team?
Well, I mean, I'd take you back even further than that.
Okay.
This company is 17 years old. And if I had the sort of wisdom from hard knocks that I have now, I would have tried to do some kind of program around standardizing methods and being objective about testing what is the best method to use as early as I possibly could, like year 1 or year 2.
Wow.
It may have looked different back then because we didn't have the same kind of resources. It probably wouldn't have looked like a job site, a fake job site built in our warehouse. But we still could have segregated or allocated time to really testing and taking the time to invest in figuring out the best process or technique for pretty much anything that we do. And the reason I say that is because what we have found just in the last 8 months or so of really, really aggressively testing methods, basically we're saying, okay, like I'll give you an example. One of the first techniques that we started working on was shimming. We do a lot of shimming. And we do a lot of shimming because our work needs to be very flat. It needs to be very plumb. We square up our spaces so that the joinery is super nice and clean. And so there's a lot of shimming work that we have to do behind the finished woodwork that we eventually install. By taking the time to really test out all the different ways and methods that are across our crew of different ways to shim, we found a method that is 75% faster than what we were doing before.
Wow.
Now times that by 70 carpenters in the field or 20 different job sites, that means we probably wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars on shimming in the last 17 years.
Yeah. That's a painful realization.
So I don't know about everyone else, but I would much rather have those hundreds of thousands of dollars, in our account right now, or have paid those hundreds of thousands out in bonuses or things that would benefit my employees, rather than just all that time that was wasted.
Yeah, I love this methodical approach to things too, because inevitably, and the teams that I've run, somebody has a lot of experience and is looked to as the person to consult on how something's supposed to be done, whether it is or not. This is the way you install a door because that's the way we've always installed a door, and you're dumb to think anything different, as opposed to being this investigative model that you're more or less getting your entire team to say, what is the best way of doing it, instead of just ad hocing it or just this predisposed ideas of this is what we should be doing or not doing. It's just
we have this saying, there's a kind of a little bit of philosophy around this. And one of the sayings that we use to communicate that is for the crew, by the crew, because we want these ideas to come from the collective brainchild of our people who are out, who are the ones closest to the work and who are having the clearest ideas about better ways to do it. And I think that if those ideas are truly coming from within the crew, then when we land on what is currently the best idea, which becomes the standard, then there's a greater likelihood of everybody else adopting it because it came from them, came from one of their own. And along with that, there's also a lot of communication about, just because we have set a technique as a standard after we have done the testing, doesn't mean that can't be upended when somebody finds a better idea to do that same thing even better. And we've actually had that happen a couple of times where we get to the end of our testing and we think, okay, this is it, we have it. And then somebody says, hey, let's try this one other thing. And we try it and it's a significant improvement.
Wow.
So we have to scrap everything we've done already to record the standard and recognize the new method because it's objectively better.
I love that trains humility in your team as well, where everyone's collectively working. And I like the buy-in that you're achieving with what you just brought up as well, which is really neat. So if we go back in time, sometimes, you're where you're at now, and, you have so many active pressures and things going on. But if you went back to when you're first starting a business, walk me through your first hire. Was that somebody that was really skilled, or was that somebody that you needed to train? What did that look like?
I'm kind of chuckling because the story about that, my first couple of hires were actually people who followed me from the company that I was working with previously.
Okay.
Which was a little bit scary and dicey because I didn't want to do anything unethical when I was starting the company. I didn't want to walk away and just like pull a bunch of employees with me. But I did have some people who wanted to come on board with whatever new thing I was doing. So there was actually a period of darkness. Like I had to sort of go dark on everybody, because when I quit my job in order to start the company, it was one of those situations where my boss was like, you know what, instead of that 6 months that you offered to find a replacement for yourself and wind down what you're doing, how about today's your last day?
Yeah,
Wow.
got walked out.
And I'll take the phone and the computer and everything else, and you're not allowed to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So there was about a week where all of a sudden I disappeared, and no one knew where I went. And I actually had somebody show up on my front porch. It was like, where have you been? What is going on? If you're doing something new, I want to come with you.
That's cool.
And it was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna even talk to you until you quit your job, because I already made a commitment that I wouldn't hire anybody away. And he quit his job, and I hired him. And that guy is still with us.
Wow, that's cool.
So what was his skill level like at the
He
time?
he was probably a mid-level carpenter at the time.
Okay. Yep.
And he came in, he's a guy that I totally trusted. We'd been working together for a couple of years, was instrumental in helping select the next group of carpenters and helping them understand sort of the way that I ran things.
Yep.
And he worked his way, he ended up becoming a foreman within our company, and then has since played several different roles. He's been in estimating, he's now in purchasing. So he's in the office now. But
what was his best skill? If you were looking to hire somebody, would he be the ideal person to hire, or would you? I mean, not to be, he's an active team member, but I'm just like, if you're going to do it over again, was that the skills that you needed at the time, or was that just what was available? Yeah. Okay, that's really
because
nice.
because it was more than just skills. It was also I needed some people around me who understood how I worked, so I wasn't starting like completely from scratch. And so it was super valuable to have somebody who understood how I worked.
I think it's a little different because you knew him specifically, and so it was like you already knew his skill level, you knew some of those things. But what is that training process? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I guess after that, you're probably looking for the answer of, how did we do our hiring in those early days? And we just started interviewing people. We actually started winning some decent sized projects, and we had to hire kind of aggressively in the first couple of years. We actually ended up hiring too aggressively, and we almost went out of business several times within the first 3 years. So I would have done it a little bit slower in hindsight, but
sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we started interviewing, and fairly quickly we realized, okay, we need to have some structure around how we do these interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was fairly early. I can't remember exactly what year it was, but it was fairly early where we started developing a hiring test, where we developed this written test that carpenters would have to take to demonstrate what level of knowledge that they had.
Give me an example of something that you have on a test like that.
It could be as basic. I remember there was a couple of photos of a tape measure, with like an arrow to a certain mark, and it was like, read this tape measure. What is this?
Yeah.
So it can be as simple as that, all the way up to list out a bullet pointed step-by-step methodology for how to hang a door.
Wow.
So it was like a graduated, it was like started out super easy, and then it got progressively harder to the point where you could see kind of what level a person's knowledge was at, and then you could start to see where they were started guessing, or they just gave up. You know,
Do you do an eval period when you hire somebody of like, 2 weeks or a week where you're saying, we're just going to see where you're at and see if this is a good fit?
yeah, we do. We actually do a 90-day period.
Okay.
I mean, we do have a check-in on week 1 and then a check-in on week 3. And if we see any like early, like really bad signs, then we may take action early on if someone's not a good fit. But the big eval period is 90 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
what
And
do you look for? Yeah.
today we have even more. You know, we still have our test is actually still based on that original test that we designed way back. It's been modified over the years. But in addition to that, we also have a list of skills where we ask a candidate to rank themselves at how good they think they are at each one of those skills. And then in addition to that, we also schedule a day or 2 before they get hired at MBD University, where they can come, show up with their tools, and we have them perform some physical skills tests. And that's nerve-wracking for a lot of new carpenters because they've never really been asked to do that before. They really feel like they're put under the microscope, but we do our best to try to help them be comfortable and help them realize like this is not a simple like pass-fail situation. That if there's a huge gap between what you say you can do and then what you can show us that you can do, then that might be a fail. But most of the time, it's simply a way for us to more accurately understand what level you're at, and that parlays into decisions about what job sites we might assign you to, or what foreman we would assign you to, and what training and support we can give you to become a better craftsman.
It's really good.
Remember when we were talking last week, what does that process look like? Because you have to ensure quality. You can't just turn somebody new loose on a job site. What's that process look like for ensuring quality on the actual job site?
That's a big answer. I actually just had a client meeting yesterday where we were talking about quality, and they were wanting a very high quality build. We had the owner's rep in our office. We were in the conference room, and we were talking about what it means to produce quality, and what do we do to produce quality. And we were talking about things like different roles in the company that have QC responsibilities. You know, that's all true. But we also were talking about like quality needs to be a part of your culture, and it needs to become embedded into your culture, and not just something that you talk about, but that's embedded into like how you actually approach your jobs and how you set up your projects. And that led into talking about grid lines or control lines. We use a lot of control lines to ensure quality work. And that conversation was all okay, but then we took them down to MBDU and into this fake job site. And I was able to show them the lines snapped on the floor, the perfectly square perpendicular control lines in the middle of a room, and the perfectly level benchmark that had been shot, and show them how we can pull from those lines to create a face of finish that's perfectly flat and perfectly square, and how much that impacts the ease of quality on work that goes on top of those substrates. And when they saw that, when they saw the physicality of it, and they saw the lines, and they, I showed them a rough door opening with a center line running through it. And I explained how part of our hiring test is seeing whether or not the carpenter centers the door jamb on that center line rather than center of rough opening, which is 2 different things. How that is a measure of quality, they completely got it when they saw that physicality of it.
Yeah, I love how like your training program became a sales tool as well.
Yeah.
That's beautiful when it's like that helps enable more sales to more business because you're able to prove quality before you're just, not just relying on referrals. You're like able to prove it when they actually come in physical. That's cool.
Yeah,
You're doing
yeah,
this
it's a
really,
sales
really-
tool and it's a recruiting tool.
Right. Yeah.
That's great. That's a great point too,
Yeah.
recruiting. You're doing this super high-end work now. So back when you first started, was that a goal for you? Were you wanting top-end market, or you were just kind of seeing where things landed? People just approached you for work and said, "Hey, Dan, can you do this?" And you did it, or did you weed people out? What were you looking for?
So I sort of, first of all, I should say that there isn't this like magical quality about doing super high-end work. I think that a lot of people look at like houses that in Architectural Digest, or they look at our Instagram, or they look at these projects that we're on that are so huge and expensive, and they think, oh, that must be easy because these people have so much money that, you know, they can pay for anything, right? That's not how it works in this business. It's super competitive. We have to bid everything. We very often screw up our budgets, and we end up having to produce work that was under budgeted. It's very hard to make it work in this business. So it wasn't like on one hand, I wanted to do super high end work because my thought was, if you're going to be a craftsman, you want to be the best at what you do, then it'd be really great to work on, you know, the tip of the spear in terms of what's out there. But I do think that there's probably other markets that it's probably easier to be profitable in.
Mm-hmm.
So that being said, I sort of just stumbled into the high end market. When I started out as a carpenter 20 plus years ago, 23 years ago, with Gary Katz, the first project that we worked on was a mansion, you know, here in LA. And so I sort of cut my teeth on high end work and have always been in that market. And so when I started this company, we were working on what anybody in the, you know, in the rest of the country would call an absolute mansion. But now that I'm 17 years in, we would actually classify that as like a lower level of the high end.
Yeah.
You know? And so now we rank our projects on a scale of 1 through 4, with 4 being the most complex and the hardest to execute. Most of the projects that we were doing when we started the company were level 1s. And now we do level 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s.
What advice would you give somebody that's, you know, a carpenter, plumber, electrician, kind of like they're in their trade, they feel like they've had some skill, they want to branch out on their own, and now they're trying to figure out what market do they serve? Is that, I mean, from what I'm hearing you saying, this is something that you had a mentor that was what he did, and so therefore he could guide you to that. Is that more important than where you end up in a market, of having some experience in it, some guidance in it? Like, let's just say you're doing, not to get the question too broad here, but essentially, let's just say you're working in a very low end or mid-range market where you're just, you know, you're doing apartment buildings, or you're doing tract housing or something like that, and you're just powering through it. There's money to be made there.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's essentially, you know, you started off your business in a very high-end market, have a mentor that can kind of guide you to that with Gary, and then you're saying, well, this is fun, this is what I want to do. But if somebody's starting out, kind of, you know, what would be your advice to somebody that's trying to figure out where's their niche? What market should they focus on?
Good question. I mean, I think from a purely business standpoint, there's probably markets where it is easier to be profitable. You know, I think about certain builds that Millworks by Design is too expensive for. But if we were structured differently, probably have better margins than what we're doing. And so from a strictly business standpoint, I would probably seriously look at lower end markets.
Are you guys
But from a
doing fixed
passion
build?
standpoint,
Yeah, okay.
you know,
Yeah.
like I think you have to balance.
Yeah.
You have to balance what kind of work you want to do
Yeah.
versus like what is the sound business decision.
Are you guys doing fixed bid on everything, Dan, or are your GCs giving you budget numbers and saying, well, just send us a bill at the end? What do you do on your estimate side?
Most of the projects that we win are fixed bid.
Okay.
That are compared to other bidders who
Yep.
also are fixed bid. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the lowest bidder is going to win the job. It's not that kind of thing. But there is a bid leveling process where where the general contractors that we work for are responsible to show their owners that they've done the due diligence to bring in a qualified vendors for fair prices.
You
So
mentioned this being very competitive. How is, obviously there's a quality level you talked about. There's a certain like set of experiences and skills and references and everything else you bring to the table, being able to show people you can deliver, but being competitive, that's, I mean, even all of that is not enough in this market, which is very interesting to hear you say. It's not as though you're guaranteed a job.
oh, no, I mean, because our pricing does have to be fair.
Yeah.
So, we may be able to provide, all the things that we can provide, but if we are exponentially higher than the other bidders, then we probably won't be hired.
Yeah. So this takes us right back to the beginning of the conversation and what you talked about university. And this is a way for you to optimize your business. The margin or the pricing is going to be the same, but you're able to build a more efficient business and make money. And I think this is when we were talking last week, I was just pondering what you were saying about you wish you had done this sooner. And I was just thinking about how many of our guys are thinking like, well, one day I will have the time, I will have the wherewithal to train my team. But in the meantime, and it's almost like you can't afford not to train your team because of the mistakes and the inefficiencies that will just cost your business dearly.
Yeah.
I thought that for a long time. One day we'll get to this. We actually made a couple attempts at it over the years, and it fizzled out. And it was always kind of that, well, one day when we're big enough and have the resources, we'll do this. But the reality is I really wish we had some kind of intentional time spent on testing which methods would be best, standardizing those methods, and then making sure that our people were trained on those methods. Because the gains are so huge,
Yeah. How do you balance that with everything else you have going on as a company? Like, how do you create time? Because I mean, obviously there's a limitless amount of things you can do. So how do you budget time for that?
In a smaller company, it has to be something that the owner, this is probably the kind of thing that the owner has to do himself. If we're talking about a really small outfit, it's one of those regrets that I wished I had spent more time on this. Even if it meant that I grew a little slower, it would have been better to spend more time on this. Today, what that looks like for us to maintain something like this, we have to have a full-time manager. We have to make it somebody's full-time job. One of the things we realize when we are trying to implement programs is that even if it's pretty important, if it's somebody's side job and they have like production-oriented tasks as part of their role, then 9 times out of 10, when it comes to what them having to make a choice about what they're going to prioritize, it's going to be the production items and not the special program. Yeah. So in this case, we realized that we put a super bright young man in charge of this, not as the carpenter guru type guy, but as a coordinator. It's very clear that his role is to bring the right people into the process, to set up the experiments, to lead the experiments, but let the guys really figure out what it is that they're doing. And then he does the video recording, he does the video editing, and all of the documentation required to capture the methodology, as well as all the management and coordination of materials and scheduling and people and all that stuff. Wow. So for us, it requires having a full-time person dedicated to the program.
Really cool.
But then it also takes a lot of, we have the same pressures. When we do our scheduling once a week, our manpower scheduling. And one of the big challenges that we ran into early on was, even though we all agreed that two guys were going to be at MBDU per week, there were weeks in there where it's like, but we're so up against it with our scheduling, and we really need those guys over on this job. Right. And so we would compromise and we would schedule the guys on the job instead of at MBDU. And that really slowed down our momentum at first. We had to get to the point where we were just constantly reiterating, this is really important. This is investing in the future. And we have to do this, even if it's super painful out in the field.
So good. There's this level of reactionary decision-making that we all find ourselves in this sort of this loop of just one bad decision feeds into another one. And this intentionality you're bringing to your team just really helps you level up in a way that is just unparalleled otherwise. And I think one of the things that our audience could just learn from, I mean, just thinking about you as a mentor, and just being, the way you've built a business that's with the intentionality and not just reacting to everything that's thrown at you. And that takes a lot of discipline, and it takes a lot of just being able to say, well, it feels like that's the most impressing thing going on right now. That feels like the intense fire, but really it's very short-sighted to make the focus entirely on that. Well done. Really.
You know what we've had to do? I'll share a little secret about that. It's been so hard that we've almost had to trick ourselves into thinking that this is one of our projects.
Huh.
In other words, we've realized we have to treat it like it's a project for a client. And that
That's
means
great.
that certain parts of our process now have to be done for MBDU. We have a weekly scheduling process. MBDU is treated just like a paying project.
So good.
Wow. Really, really
Yeah.
done. Yeah. So tell me about your crew just a little bit here. So a lot of times the tricky spot is like, who do you hire? Do you go for a level 10 carpenter? You have this 1 to 10 scale. And you were telling me last week about the team makeup. And it's kind of surprising, I think, to our audience to find out you actually want a balance of mid-level, low-level carpenters, not everybody has the best of the best. And so walk me through how you think about that.
So this is another challenging thing because the knee-jerk reaction is we want the best. We want the highest level always. And the reality is that for our managers, like for our foremen who are responsible for getting work done on site, having too many lower level guys, it can be challenging because more mistakes.
Yep.
It's harder to supervise. And when you have a whole team full of 8s, 9s, and 10s, it actually makes your job much easier as a foreman and smoother. So we have to watch that. We don't want to overburden our foremen by giving them too many lower level guys. But we also need to keep an eye on the long term and the future and make sure that we have younger, less experienced carpenters starting out at the lower levels and working their way up. And we need that because we need carpenters on our crew 10 years from now. Some of the older guys, more experienced guys will be retiring, will be moving on. B, we also want to make sure that we have new blood coming into the company all the time, because from the ranks of the carpenters, there could be so many, those guys are not limited to only being carpenters. We have people who have transitioned from our carpentry crew into estimating, who've transitioned into engineering, and from those roles, there will be transitions that occur into things like purchasing or logistics or project management. So there is a path. And as we continue to grow, we will need people in those roles. And it is much better to have people who have come up through the ranks of our program and how we do things. And so the long-term view is we really need to have a balanced crew where we have a certain number of people who are coming up from the bottom.
This is a little more personal. So what kind of disciplines, just as a business owner, have you learned? I mean, 17 years as a business owner, from the early days to today, what does your routine look like today? And what do you wish it would have looked like when you first started? Or what did you nail right from the beginning? But how has that evolved over time? Because, you have so many pressing things to work on and you have to prioritize almost so much of your time. But what does that look like today? And what would you tell somebody that's starting a business? Where does their time need to go? How do you prioritize what needs to be done? And what does your personal schedule kind of look like as part of that?
Well, it has evolved over the years. There have been years where I have been more disciplined, and have been years where I've been less disciplined. There have been years where I have let go or stopped doing certain meetings that at the time felt a little bit rote, like routine, or just like,
Yep.
Is this a waste of time? Is it not a, but things have not worked as well in those periods where we didn't have that rhythm and discipline as they did when we did have the rhythm and discipline. So I do have a I do have a routine. My routine, like there are certain meetings that fit into our process that happen on a monthly basis and others that happen on a weekly basis. And so those are locked in my calendar. And I spend a pretty good chunk of my time syncing up with the people who all report to me. So like for each one of my direct reports, I have a weekly, what I call a sync meeting, synchronization meeting. And one of them, I have one direct report who's also my business partner, who's running all of our operations. So he has a lot under his umbrella. Sometimes my weekly meeting with him can last 3 or 4 hours.
Oh,
That happens every Monday afternoon. And then others, it could be a 30-minute thing, So I have weekly sync meetings with each of my direct reports. I've got a PM, what I call a project management portfolio review meeting that happens once a month, which is an all-day thing where myself and my CFO and my director of operations and a few other department managers sit down with each PM and we go through their whole portfolio one time per month. And then a week after that, I have what I call a director's meeting where the director level people who report to me report in their metrics. And that's all tied to our financial close process and our financials, which we close every month. So that's like a monthly rhythm that happens there. And those meetings always bring out the project issues that are occurring, or, we're looking at slip gain on budget. We're looking at cash flow. We're looking at customer happiness. And that always produces a long list of action items that, need to be done in the next month. And then I have a weekly estimating and sales meeting, and a weekly HR sync meeting, HR and safety sync meeting, and a few other like weekly and monthly rhythms like that. And then the rest of the stuff is all ad hoc that fits in between.
Yeah.
what else are you doing? I mean,
So much free time.
that's a busy life. What do you love most about all of that? I mean, what makes you excited to get to work in the morning?
What gets me out of bed is the challenge of building a great team.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to create a place that figures out how to deliver craftsmanship at scale. Number one. And number two is creating a work environment where people can truly grow. And observing people grow is probably the most rewarding thing that I have here.
Well, I love it.
And growth, it's like the struggle of it. It's not like this, oh, we learned a new thing and we get a gold star and then we learn another. It's like watching people try to do hard things, like really put their effort in and fail a few times and have to really find, that whatever it is inside of you that pushes through when it's hard, like that kind of growth.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And just even in your own story, Dan, hearing you talk about from the early years of wondering whether or not you're going to make it, no doubt tight days when you're not sure if you're going to make a payroll, not sure of if you guys are going to survive it. And going to now you're building celebrity homes and doing the things and growing a team and doing the thing you love to do. Not that it's all flowers and unicorns and butterflies, but it nonetheless it's a journey of really adversity and triumph, and it's beautiful. And I think for our audience, where you might be struggling today, you might not know where next week's work's coming from, to see Dan's story here of just putting the next foot, one foot in front of the other, pushing on to the next milestone and not getting lost in the present, but at the same time living in the present and making, but nonetheless realizing tomorrow is predicated on the decisions you make today.
It's a really bizarre balance. I mean,
Yeah.
because especially and there's been so many seasons in the history of this company where it's been legitimate crisis. Like, for example, in year 3 or so, we got to the point where we couldn't make payroll. And we had to make some real big choices about how we were going to handle that. And which was one of the most embarrassing and painful things for me to go through.
Yeah.
And we've had other situations where it's just been absolute crisis, you know. And the thing is, when you're in crisis like that, it's almost next to impossible to think about the future, right? It is one step in front of the other. And so, but what you have to be doing is keeping an eye on the future. You have to be making decisions and investing in things that put you where you want to be in the future. And so it's this really bizarre balance where you kind of constantly have to have one foot in the now and the other foot in the future, and be making sure that you're not stepping too hard on either one of those.
Yeah. Were there any pivotal moments as we kind of, wind this thing down or wind it up? I'm not sure which one we're doing. But where you felt like maybe extremely challenging or personally stressful moment for you that was really insightful, or a learning moment, or like one of these moments that was like, wow, it stands out?
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is what I just mentioned about not being able to make payroll.
Yeah.
I'll try to tell you the short story of that. But what happened is we had grown too fast, and we had not figured out our pricing completely. We were underpricing things, and we were not making enough money. And so our cash requirements exceeded the revenue that was coming in to support what we were doing. But we were caught in this thing where if you stop, then you're definitely not going to get everybody paid. So you kind of have to keep going, you have to, but you also have to be honest with your people about what's happening, which if they know what's happening, there's a lot of fear that's created, and maybe you'd lose everybody because maybe they just quit, and then you're just left with this huge mess, right? So there was some real pivotal moments where we had to decide how we were going to handle that kind of a situation. And what we decided is that we were going to be transparent, and that we were going to be completely honest, and we were not going to tell people things that we didn't know. We weren't going to make promises that we couldn't keep. And we were also going to tell them how bad it was. And that ended up being about a 6-month period where sometimes we would make payroll and other times we wouldn't. And the worst time, I think the worst was about 3 weeks, or like 3 weeks in a row, where we couldn't make payroll for 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
And so we just had a weekly meeting about it every single week. And we said, okay, here's where we're at. Here's what we're doing. If you guys feel like you need to leave, we understand, but we want you to stay. And we promised that we will get you paid back at some point. And at that time, I promised that I would pay them interest on top of the money that we owed them. We didn't have one person quit.
Wow.
Not one person. We even had situations happening where we may have enough money to pay for part of the payroll, but not all of it. And they would band together and figure out among themselves which ones would get paid and which ones wouldn't. A lot of times the single guys would volunteer to go without pay for longer so that the guys with families would get paid first.
Wow. What a beautiful team there. Yeah, that's just amazing.
It took a long time. I mean, it was like a 6-month period where it was like on again, off again.
Yeah.
But once we got our feet under us a little bit more, and then it was just like payback mode, we started making payments to those people, basically like they had loaned us the money. And it took probably 2 years to get everybody paid off completely. But what it taught me is that even in a super extreme crisis like that, if you are just honest and square with people about what's going on and what you're trying to do to fix it, and you ask for their help, people are incredibly generous with their loyalty.
So true. And that honesty piece, like keeping all the facts in front of them and giving your team agency, and that really brilliant to do that. And obviously the level of humility you have to have in that moment, it's so painful.
Oh, it's so embarrassing. Like
Yeah.
I told myself when I started this company I will never be one of those guys, one of those hack construction owners who can't make payroll. Those guys are the worst, And then less than 3 years later, there I was, fixing my worst fear. But what one of the other things I learned about it is that we as humans are so weird. Like when we get ourselves into positions of leadership, all of a sudden we feel like we have to be right about everything. And we have to be the kind of person who never makes a mistake. And the reality is that nobody respects a leader who can't admit to their mistakes.
So true.
Nobody does. We all know this, and one of the most powerful things that a leader can do to get the respect of their people is to be honest about their mistakes. It almost works like, it's almost like an algorithm. Make a mistake, admit to it, be really honest about it, be honest about what you've learned, be honest about what you're doing differently. That creates respect.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah.
But for some reason, we just, we feel like we have to be something different once we become leaders.
Would you view that as almost an exercise, Dan, when you're thinking about, because my dad used to say some of the best lessons in life are the ones we already know. And it's not knowledge in the moment when you need to go to somebody and say, hey, I messed up. It's not like you need to know what to do. It's doing it that's so hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you exercise that?
Ooh. Yeah, courage.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. This has been a
Courage.
very fun conversation. We could go on for hours. I know you got a ton to do. Any final thoughts? Anything you want to leave our audience with?
The biggest thing for me, I think, is I know that a lot of listeners are probably running a lot smaller companies, may even feel like, yeah, that works for big companies. I'm a whole different thing. I think the main thing that I would leave everybody with is I think the whole concept of standardizing your techniques, and not just standardizing it once, but leaving it open so that when ideas come up, you test them. And when you find a better way of doing it, you then update the standard. And then you use those standards to hold yourself accountable if you are an owner operator, or hold your crew accountable to those standards, train your crew. Then I think the financial benefit of that is just absolutely huge.
Thanks so much. Fun conversation. Looking forward to having you back again. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.